Hello everyone, this is CJ with Cycletron. Today I'd like to talk about Harley's used motorcycle problem. Now, before I get into all the details, I'd appreciate it if you would please like and subscribe. And I appreciate all the support you've been giving me on my recent videos as I continue to build this channel. You know, really it's a problem for the whole industry, but a particular problem for Harley Davidson. If you look at just declining motorcycle sales in general, as really the prime motorcycle market is aging, this particularly affects Harley Davidson. You know, they used to publish their average customer age, and they would update it periodically, and they quit doing that. But by all accounts, average age of a Harley Davidson motorcycle owner is about 55. Now, I recently posted a video about, you know, how long do you plan to ride? Just more of a philosophical thing, and is your approach to aging and how you can continue to incorporate motorcycle riding with that. And I know many of you plan to ride as long as possible, and I'm definitely in that camp, but eventually a certain amount of reality intrudes, and a lot of folks are going to be selling their motorcycle cycles over the coming years. You know, Harley's had a problem with basically too many used bikes affecting resale values and essentially cannibalizing sales of new bikes. Now, for a short-term basis, as far as 2020, they resolved some of that by cutting production of their 2020 bikes and delaying introduction of the 2021 models. But, you know, I just wanted to run the numbers to see what this might look like in the coming years. So, just doing some research on the internet, recent information indicates there's about 8.3 million registered motorcycle owners in the United States, and it's estimated roughly 30% of those owners are for Harley Davidson motorcycles. So if we take 8.4 million times 30%, that gives us about 2.5 million Harley Davidson motorcycles registered in the United States. So if people are registering them, by and large, they're still riding those motorcycles, and so they're still viable motorcycles to be used, to be traded in, to be sold, and so on. So if we look at the average age of a Harley Davidson motorcycle owner at 55, and say, okay, if average age is 55, so half the owners are 55 and older, roughly. So that's a little bit over 1.25 million, and let's assume that 2/3 of those people will be selling their motorcycle in the next 10 years. Selling it because they're getting out of motorcycling. A few of them will trade up to other models, whether it's with a different manufacturer or just a different bike altogether. But I think it's a fairly realistic scenario where we could say that 2/3 of the Harleys that are owned now by people 55 and older are going to be sold in the next 10 years, which produces a real glut of used motorcycles on average of about an extra 80,000 Harley Davidsons a year for the next 10 years. So what's that going to do to new motorcycle sales for Harley Davidson, for Indian, for BMW, for other manufacturers? How's that going to enable you to sell your bike at a decent price if you decide to get out, or to trade up to another bike? It sort of reminds me of the 2009 recession, when it was really going hard, and of course the federal government bailed out the auto manufacturers in several different ways. And one of the programs they came up with, if you recall, is the cash for clunkers, as it was known. And on the surface, it was touted as a way of getting low mile per gallon vehicles off the road. Presumably they were more polluting as well, but all it was a stimulus to try and sell more new vehicles. So the government offered people, for qualifying vehicles, which were usually vehicles that got under 18 miles per gallon, anywhere from $2,500 to $4,500 per vehicle that qualified. And the idea is, well, they trade that in for a new car or truck, and then the car they traded in had to be destroyed. So the government set aside $3 billion for this program. And given the number of vehicles that they had and all the associated costs for buying the vehicle and having it destroyed and so on, the government spent $24,000 per vehicle. So it wasn't cost effective. It turned out to be not so great environmentally either, because of the recycling or scrapping process wasn't that great in some instances. But it definitely stimulated sales of new cars. So I'm not saying that that's what Harley Davidson and the other manufacturers should be doing, is looking to the government to offer a cash for clunkers buyback program to mop up this huge glut of used motorcycles that's already on the market, but it's going to continue to compound in the coming years. So it got me thinking, back in the mid-90s, I went on a business trip to Cambodia. And it's pretty interesting. It was like the Wild West, really, because Cambodia had gone through a lot of stuff during wartime years. They were occupied by Khmer Rouge for 5 years and taken over, and then Vietnam installed a caretaker government for 10 years, and then the UN held elections to try and get things stabilized and get that country moving forward again. And I was on their industrial project there, and our local fixer, as it were, you always had to have a local middleman, because the way the U.S. Multinational companies are constrained in how they do business overseas, and if you want to do business effectively, you basically got to get a middleman, so you don't run afoul of certain laws. So anyway, this local fixer had a side business where he imported, I think, 10 pretty crummy Econoline vans from like the 80s, early 80s, to Cambodia. I mean, in the US they would have been like $800 vans, and he made a fortune on those, because there was probably only 200 cars in the whole country at that time, and this guy would rent them out. He'd haul people around in them, rent them out to companies. I mean, it was brilliant. So what occurred to me is Harley just consolidated about 100 dealerships in the United States. That probably resulted in upwards of 3,000 people losing their job. And it's just a thought. I mean, obviously this isn't a detailed business plan, but it's a concept that, since Harley just pulled out of 40 international markets to concentrate on their existing customers in North America and Europe, there's still opportunities. I mean, obviously Harley at one time thought these were viable motorcycle markets. So what if a company were established, or multiple companies, to buy up these used motorcycles relatively cheaply and get them out of the country, export them to these other countries that Harley previously identified as good targets for selling new bikes, and gave up on it. But I think you could have an opportunity to sell used bikes. In fact, part of the Department of Commerce is geared towards promoting American companies in developing export businesses overseas, whether it's parts or completely assembled products like a used motorcycle. So you have to look into the local laws about what restrictions they may have to protect their own industry. Some countries won't let you import used items and things like that. But I think there's a lot of countries that would allow that. And, even though there's no infrastructure right now, I mean, they could get parts. You could ship parts to them. You could have local people work on the things. I mean, I think it's completely viable. When I've traveled to Vietnam, I was always amazed to see 50-year-old Honda Cubs running around that people have been riding since the Americans left them behind in the 60s, and they managed to find parts and make parts to keep those things going. So I can envision a company that's exporting all these bikes. I mean, Harley Davidson should have an active hand in this kind of thing, as far as I'm concerned. They should work with these companies, provide a reliable source of used bikes, and get them out of the country for Harley's benefit, and for the benefit of owners like me who don't want a complete tanking of the resale value. This is my 2019 Street Guide Special. I love this bike, but out the door 2 years ago it was like $29,000. Now, I know trade-in value is a lower value. I could get more for it if I sold it myself, which has got its own headaches, but just for comparison purposes, the trade-in value on this bike as it sits today, 2 years later, is about $18,500. If you go to a 2017 model, Street Glide Special, it's down to $13,500. I mean, that's over 35% depreciation in the first 2 years. And, over 50% going out 4 years, which is brutal. So I think it would be in Harley's best interest and in the best interest of a lot of consumers to basically stabilize the price of these used bikes by getting rid of the glut that's here now and is going to only get worse going forward. So that's where I'm at with this. I think there are people out there that know their way around as far as getting good supply of used Harley Davidson motorcycles. I mean, there was a motorcycle dealer here in the Kansas City area, Gale's Harley Davidson. They switched out to selling side-by-sides and used Harleys because they were, of course, like a lot of dealers, they were starved out on deliveries of new motorcycles this year. So what do you guys think, and gals, think about this idea for a potential export business? Do you see it helping the motorcycle market in general? Is this something you'd be interested in pursuing? Please drop your comments down below, and again, please like and subscribe. Thanks a lot.